What's good, team? Welcome to another Small James coding tutorial where today we're going to be building out a React portfolio with TailwindCSS and using an AI called MidJourney to generate the web design and build it from there. So we'll be covering absolutely everything, how you can use the AI, generate the images, and then how we can build that layout, that UI. We'll generate a few of them and how we can build that into our own React developer portfolio. It's super functional. We've got some cool links down the side. They open up into all your different resources. We've got some scroll features and a modal where you can display all of your projects. So lots of great information if you're looking to learn React. Anyway, if you enjoy the video, don't forget to like and sub, and let's get into it. So to dive into our project today, we're going to start off on the MidJourney.com website. MidJourney is the AI that we're going to be using to generate our web designs. And it's a Discord server, so you're going to need a Discord account for this tutorial, but we're going to join the beta, and that's going to take us to a Discord link, which I have already accepted. You'll want to accept that link, and then you'll come to this Discord server right here, and you're going to be looking to jump into one of these three rooms here. Now, once we're in these rooms, you'll have the ability to type in the chat and to use this particular AI for the image generation. Here you can see a whole lot of images that other people have already generated. What we're going to do is type /imagine, and that's going to allow you to enter a prompt, and the prompt is then going to be passed to the AI generator, and that's where you'll get your image from. Now, in this tutorial, we're looking to generate a web portfolio, so we're just going to type web portfolio like that. We might type UI, UX, UX, UI / UX. And maybe like Figma, and in front we might also just type landing page, developer web page, just like that. We'll chuck in website at the back, maybe layouts, a color scheme. So for the color scheme, we're gonna want white background with blue and violet accents. And maybe we just chuck in minimalism. Could look good. And finally, we will need to type --version /4 for version 4. So we use the 4th version of the AI. And you can also pass in a stylized prompt of that varies between 0 and 1,000, but we're actually not going to worry about that. So when we click enter, this is going to create a job right here. So we can see that the job is currently waiting to start. And while that's generating, you can see what everyone else is. Some people just randomly post stuff, but once that's started, you'll get a percentage. I find it's often useful to hop out of the chat, and then when the job is complete, we'll get a notification and it will take us right to the finished result. So here we can see that the job is finished. It's important to note that we may need a couple of iterations to get what we want, but here we can see that we already have some really cool looking designs. Personally, I think that they're too close to a landing page, so I think I'm going to remove that keyword. So I'm just going to copy everything just here, do the exact same thing, get the prompt, pass it in, except this time I won't use that. And instead I might type profile and no faces, just so that we can remove the emphasis on the face. I might also just add the word gradients in there too, so that we can get maybe some more interesting gradients as well. So now we come back in and we can see our design. And I actually don't mind this one right here. That looks pretty good. And so what we could do is use some of the follow-up options to either get an upscaled version of one particular image or generate new versions based off that particular image itself. So in this case, the images are labeled 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we're going to want to upscale number 3 so we can upscale it. If you wanted to generate additional variations based off one of them, then you would just use the V command. So V3 would generate additional variations of something that was similar to this. And that will just create another job down here that will upscale. So here we have the upscaled version of our particular image. While we're at it, that's a pretty cool looking mushroom. But anyway, we're going to take this and save that image so that we have it. And we can just save it just like that. And we will be able to use that for our web design. Now, I also have another image that just happens to be very similar. So this is a secondary image that I generated earlier. We're going to be using both of these in this particular project. taking inspiration from each of them for the UI and the web design. And I would recommend when you're doing this for yourself, if you want to go with your own custom images, that you generate like a number of versions or variations of the same thing. That way you can just take the best from each of them. So now for our next step, we're going to have to come over to Vite React Tailwind. So we're going to look that up in Google, and this first result here will tell us how to initialize a React project with Tailwind with Vite. And here I've opened up a Visual Studio editor and the terminal where we can start typing these commands. So we're going to type npm create Vite at latest, and now we can name our project. So I might just call it AI React. And then we have to give --template. And if we come across here, we can see that the last term is just React. So that's going to create a React project for us. Now we can cd into that project, AI React, and open up our Visual Studio so that we have our project here in the directory. And now while in that directory, we can go ahead and run the rest of the commands here. So we can run some npm installs, install everything that Tailwind requires for the configuration of our project. We can init the Tailwind files just up there, and then we can copy in this content to the Tailwind config like this. So we'll enter that onto a new line, paste that in there, and finally add these commands to our index.css file. So I'm going to clear this out, paste those 3 commands in there. And while we're at it, we may as well just gut all the content that currently exists in our project. So we'll remove all of that. We will remove the statements, get rid of all of the imports, and that way we can actually also delete this app.css file. So having all of that done, we should be able to follow the final command, which is npm run dev. And we can see that that opens up a project on localhost 5173. So we can open that up there. We get a blank file as we would expect. And if I come in here and add an h2 that says James, that pops up on the screen. And if I give this a class name of background purple 300 text white, we can see that that also works. So Tailwind is configured inside of our project. Now, if we come back to our image for a second, the first things that we notice is that there is a navbar. We have a general section, so a hero text section, we have a bit of an image, and then we have a bar down the side. So I think that would be good for displaying some of your skills and stuff like that. If we look at our other image, we can see that it has a similar layout. So we have that nav bar, we have the text section, and then this one actually has what I find is a better profile section. So we could have a profile here, and then once again, we could have all of our skills or competencies down the side like that. So in our particular project, what we're going to have to configure is some files, and we'll do that inside of our source file by making a components folder. And in here, we can start out with a layout.jsx using the RFC command to auto generate that component. We're going to have a main.jsx. So we can once again RFC, and we're going to have a navbar.jsx. So with those 3 components made, we can come back into our app, and we can actually replace this with the layout component. So make sure that that's imported up the top, and we'll need an opening and closing tag for that particular component. And in here, we can render out the main. This one does not need a closing tag, so we can just have a self-closing tag. And inside of our layout.jsx, we're going to have to receive the props and destructure children from them. So children is equal to props, that's destructured. And then inside of this, we can just render out children just like that. And now we can see that our main is still rendered at the top within our layout. And this gives us the ability to start adding some classes here. So we can add class name, min height screen. So that's going to make it the minimum height of the screen. We can see that by saying background purple 300, that does indeed occupy the full height of the screen. We can also give it a display, a flex direction of column. Maybe we also want to give it a position of relative. And in here, we're going to have a main section which holds our uppercase main, because this is getting rendered inside of the children, so inside of the main. we can give this a class name of flex, col, and flex1, so that that also occupies as much space as it can. And that will allow us to add our nav bar just there, so we can have that import up the top. And now we have our nav bar sitting above our main. And inside of our nav bar component, we can give this a class name of sticky, so that it always sticks to the top of the page. A display of flex and items center, and maybe a gap of about 8. Well, actually, let's make it 4, but then on a small screen, we might say gap of 8. So if we come back to our inspiration images, the first thing we can see is that in both of them, we have this little nav bar up the top. Now, I quite like the look of this one just here. So it looks like we have a little icon, then we have a name, and then we have some links of some sort. And so what I'm going to do for that is come up into this section just here and define a links component, and that's going to be an array. Now, inside of this array, it's going to be an array of arrays where we're going to have all of our links. So I'm going to have LinkedIn, and then the second item, or the second element inside of that array, will be the link to that element. So we're also going to have a GitHub link, and we'll fill that out in a second. And I'm personally going to have a YouTube link, just like that. So there's my LinkedIn, there's my GitHub, and there's my YouTube. And so in here, what we can do is actually just give this a justify between, because remember, we're going to have an element on this side and on this side. And we're going to render out a div over here. So this is going to contain the title header, which I'll deal with in a second. And then on the other side, we're going to use a use some mapped content. So we're going to say links.map. We'll destructure out each link and maybe an index if we need it. We'll use an arrow function to return some JSX. So this is going to be an anchor tag with an href equal to link and the first entry. So that needs to be curly braces. We can say link at number 1. And we can also say target is equal to underscore blank. So that opens up in a new tag. And in here, we can just render out the name of the link, which is link 0, making sure that we wrap that inside of curly braces. So that we can see that we have all of our links. So that is super nice. The gap is perhaps a little bit large, but what we're actually going to need to do is wrap this inside of its own div, because currently we weren't having that gap in between, whereas now if we wrap it inside of its own div, that will work. And then we can give this a class name of flex items center and maybe a gap of 4. And now we have a header in that corner, and then we have some nice little links separated over there. So what I might have over that side is just JM for James MacArthur. That doesn't look too bad. And what I might do on this entire component is just giving a padding of 4 so it pushes everything in a little bit. So now what we need to do is style some of these links. So the first thing I'm going to do is swap this also over to an anchor tag, because it should actually be an href back to the main page. So when we click on it, it's going to take us home. And now we can check out this page here, and we can see that the initial text is slightly larger than the subsequent text. Same in this one. So this one is bigger than these ones. So we can adjust that by just saying text is extra small, and then on a small screen, the text is small. And we can manually set this text here just to being text small, small screen, text base. Just like that. So now we can see that that is going to be slightly larger, which is perfect. So that brings us into the second section, which is going to be the main section. Now for our main section, we're also going to just give this a padding of 4 so it pushes it in a little bit. And if we look at this image here, we can see that this section is actually a lighter color than this. So I might just come into our layout and change that real quick. So we're going to set the background slate 100 and the text slate 900. So that should make it a little bit darker, and that's going to allow us to have a light nav bar over here. And it looks like this section is kind of going to be spread into 3 subsections, which is going to be this stuff just here, a little profile section, and then this bar over the side. And so we can probably do that with 3 columns, and I think that that would probably work quite nicely. And we're also going to have to make sure that this is mobile responsive. So on a mobile device, what I might do is have this section first, this section second, and this section third. So what we may as well do is actually just create a component for each of them. So this one is going to be the experience side. So we can make it experience.jsx, if I could actually spell that right. Experience.jsx, we can RFC that. We can have another component which is going to be about me.jsx, RFC, and then we can have one more which can be skills.jsx, RFC, just like that. And we can start off by rendering these 3 out inside of here. So we might give this a style of grid, so we'll make it a grid. We can say grid cols 1, so that's going to be 1 column, and then anything smaller than a medium screen, we can say grid cols 3, so it turns into 3 columns. And in here we can have the about me component, we can have the experience component, and we can have the skills component, remembering that all of these need to be imported at the top. So if we look at that, we can see that we have 3 sections there. And then as I come bigger, it turns into a grid. We could also say place items center. So that should center everything in the middle, which is nice and neat. And actually I might just change that. So what we're going to do is actually set this as a flex and flex col. And then on a medium screen, we can then swap it to a grid. So that's going to ensure that everything just occupies the maximum amount of space. So now it's going to be a flex column, and then as we go bigger, everything is going to occupy a third of the page. So if we come into our picture again, we can see that the first section here starts off with a really nice big header. And so that is inside of our about me. And so we can add that in as an H1 that says James MacArthur. Now, if we come into our document, we can see that right there, and we're going to have to apply some text styles here. So we can say font bold, text 4XL, nice and large. We could possibly make that 5XL, maybe 4 is better. On a small screen, we can bump that up to a text 6XL. So now when I bring this across, it jumps up even larger. And underneath that, we can have an let's say H2 section, so H2 just like that. And this can be our title, so mine might be software engineer content creator, like that. We can also give this some styles, so we might say font semi-bold, text XL, small text 3XL. So let's see how that looks. There we have our titles. We could possibly bring this down a bit more. I might say large into 2XL, so it's just a little bit smaller. There we have it there. We might have to do something about that in a minute, but we can get there when we get there. I might also change this to medium, just so it's a little bit finer. And then underneath that, we can have a paragraph tag, and this can just be some, generic sentence that says, I absolutely love to create fun and interesting sites using the latest and greatest technology. My sites will be better than yours, no doubts about it. So there's our little fun paragraph that kind of talks about our skills. And if we check out that section, it looks like at the very bottom, we just have some buttons. And we also can see that there's some text stuff going on here. So if we just take a second to adjust the text, we might say that this one is text slate 800, so it's ever so slightly lighter. And this one might have a class of text extra small. So we'll bring that text extra small. So we bring that down. On a small screen, we can bump up to text small. Actually, instead of doing that, let's add that in here. So we'll just say Text is by default extra small, but on small screens, text becomes small. And now I will not need that in here. But what I will do is bring down the color so we can say text slate 500. And now it's just going to be a little bit lighter. The other thing I can do is just add some spacing between them. So if I give this a class name of flex, a flex direction of column, and a gap of 4, that would just push them apart. But actually, if we look at the image, yeah, that's probably about a 4, maybe a 3. Just a bit closer together, and then when we come into a big screen, it still looks pretty decent. So the last thing we're going to have under here is a section for buttons. So we can give this a div, and we can also say class name of my, so margin y of about 10. We can give this a flex items center. Let's have a look at how the buttons look. So we've got 2 buttons here, and it looks like they just have a bit of a gap. We can make the gap about 4. Might make it a button that will at some point open up some projects. So I might just say projects in here. And then that one might say contact. So let's just say button contact, just like that. And now we can style them. So this one has some nice gradients going on. So in here we can give this a class name. Both of them are all lowercase, so I'll just make them lowercase. And so we can see that in the image this is going to be rounded full. It's going to have a background gradient to right. If we look at the picture, it's approximately like a dark navy to purple. So we might say from blue 8, maybe 700 to violet 700, and we'll also say text white. Let's have a look at what that looks like. So that's it just there. We obviously need to bump up the size, so we might say padding 4. That's not too bad. I might also bring up the text size for both of these, so I'll say text small, and on a small we can have text medium, just like that. I think it might be text base. Let's see how that works. That bumps it up. Yep. And I might actually change that to a px of 4 and a py of 2, just so it looks a bit more like that. And then for this contact one, we actually have a border. So this is going to have a lot of the same styles, so we can just copy that directly. Class name, paste all of that in. We can remove a lot of the gradient stuff. We can say text purple 800, just like that. Padding x of 4, and then we can give it a border solid, a border maybe violet 800. So now that's going to have a nice little border. So now we have our 2 buttons, and what we're going to do is just say hover opacity 70. So when we hover, it just gets a bit lighter, and we'll add the exact same for the other one. Just like that. Now we can see that the transition duration is instant. So what we're going to do is, instead of adding that everywhere, we're going to come into our index and select everything and just say transition duration 250 milliseconds. So now when we hover over these, we can see that the sections are nice and neat. So if we take a quick look at that, we can see that our buttons are coming along nicely. And so what we could actually do is change the way that this is laid out, because before I kind of said we'd have this section and then this section, but I think it actually makes more sense to go across like this for one component and then go across like that for another. So if we're going to do that, we're going to have to make some minor adjustments and wrap most of this inside of a div. So we're just going to wrap all of that content inside of a div. And so we can notice a couple of things about these particular components here. The first one is that they are similar in size. And the second is that we're going to have to actually be able to account for a vertical layout. And so what I think I might do is start it off with a flex and flex col layout. And in here underneath the H1, I'm going to add an image. So I can say image source is equal to, and I personally will just use my LinkedIn picture. So if you jump over to your LinkedIn page and copy that image address, you will be able to add that in there as the source. We can give it an alt equals me, close that tag, just like that. And now we have a picture that's pretty low res, but it doesn't really matter because I'm about to change that. We can give this a class name that has MX Auto. Maybe height is 20. Maybe we say 200 pixels. We can say aspect video, aspect square, so that the aspect ratios are always the same. We can give it a rounded full, just like that, and maybe a shadow, so that it shadow large even, so that it sits off the page a little bit. So there's our nice little picture. And then what we want is on anything bigger than a small screen. Actually, that depends. So here we use the medium breakpoint, so that's what we're going to stick to. So anything bigger than a medium screen, we're actually going to make this hidden. So now when I come up, it's gone, and that's because I'm going to put it here. Also, let me just quickly comment that out for a second because that will come later. But anyway, so we come up to a larger screen. We're going to have an image over here. And we can do that by, on the medium screen here, just having grid, medium, grid cols 2. So that will split this into 2 columns. There's one column, we'll have the second column there. And we're just going to copy this same component. So we'll copy this image and we will have a secondary section just underneath. So when we go to grid cols 2, we can just render it out again, changing this medium hidden to a default of hidden, and on a medium screen we just want to give it a display of flex, for example. So now when I jump up, we can see that we get that other image just there popping up. So that is coming along. The other thing we have to do is just fix whatever's going on here, because that is unacceptable. And to do that, what we have to do is come into our main and set this to grid cols 2. So now when we do that again, we can see that we have a little image just to the side, looking nice and neat. Unfortunately, that text is going behind, but we can figure that out later. What I might actually do is just put the name next to the image here. So we can do that by just having a div and bringing that to wrap both of them and giving this a class name of flex items center. Cool. So this is on a small screen. We've got James MacArthur just there. We come up to a big screen and it jumps across. So if we just take a second to look at the image, the first thing we notice is that this whole section here actually takes up about almost 4/5, but let's say 3/4 of the space, whereas currently I've just split it into 2. So we can actually configure this once more by splitting that into 4 columns and making sure that on a medium space, this particular div right here, so we can implement that. Let's say this is split into fifths. Is that approximately fifths? 3, no, it's quarters. So let's say that's 3/4 and this is 1/4. So the way that we can implement that is inside of here, we can set that to 4/4 on a medium screen. And in our about me, what we can do is just say on a medium screen that it's cols span 3. So that means this is going to span 3 columns. And so if we come back into this, that didn't work, and that's because that's just meant to be col span. But now we can see that this section here actually occupies 3/4, and then our skills section over here will just occupy 1. So that's real nice, and then we come down onto a smaller screen. So if we keep going with that, the next section we have is under this image right here, and that is going to be all of this stuff. So I'm going to put that in as a new component, and that is going to be experience. So here we can have a list of our experiences, and I'm going to just use grid layout for that. So it's going to be grid cols 1 initially, and then on a medium screen, we're going to build it up to grid cols 3. We'll give each of them a gap of maybe 2. And now we're going to have, you could have your previous experiences in here. So what I might just do is have a map in here, and I can say const experiences is equal to an array. And in here, each of these arrays is going to contain an object. So what we can do is break that up so it looks real neat. If I just enter that onto a new line, bump that down and that down. And in here, we're just going to have a title parameter, empty string. We'll have a position, empty string, and we'll have a description. Or actually what we could do is just have company, like that is probably more logical. So we can just duplicate that 3 times. And in here you could have company 1, dope manager. We can have, don't know why I'm doing that all in uppercase, dope manager, company 1, just like that. Description, I did a whole lot of things, but I can't really remember them specifically, so you'll have to take my word on it. That can be number 1, and for the sake of it, I might actually just have that for all 3 of them. Cool, so now that we have all of that content, that means that we can just map it out and use the same component for each. So in here, what I can do is I can just go experiences.map, once again, destructure an experience and an index. And we can use an arrow function to return some JSX. So we're going to return a div for each. And just to see what we're dealing with, I might go experience.company. So here we would expect to see the experience section showing up, but it's not because I actually removed it. And that's because in here we have this flex column layout, and we're going to have to be clever with how we do this just here. So what I'm actually going to do is structure this a little bit differently and wrap about me and experience inside of a div. So we're going to have experience just here. So that's going to place them one on top of another, and we can see our companies mapped out here. But now we see that when I go onto a larger screen, that's totally broken. And so what I have to do to resolve that is just give this a class and instead swap the grid col span to the parent component, which is actually just going to be this div just here. So instead, now when we come up to a big screen, we maintain that and we have these little boxes just down there, which is perfect. What we're also going to want to make sure we do is just give this a flex and a flex column, because they're always going to sit on top of one another. We might just give them a gap of 4 so that they're a little bit spread out. And now we should be able to come into that section and actually continue filling it out. So in here, what I'm going to do is give this a class of flex, flex col, and gap 2. I'll enter that onto a new line. And what I'll do here is have the company name inside of an h1 tag. Pop that at the end. Now we have our companies. Underneath, I'll have an h2, and that's going to be experience.position. And then I'm going to have a paragraph tag down here that has experience.description. So just like that. We're also going to give each of these a gap of 4 so that they're a little bit more spread out. Now we can come in here and style these. So this is going to be text large, font medium, so that's going to bold it. Actually, we can just say font semi-bold, just like that. We can give this one a class of text base. We can give it a font medium, so it's not quite as bold. And we might just say text slate 600, so it's a little bit lighter. And then finally, for the paragraph, we can give this a text slate 500, so that's even lighter again. Now, I think that I might actually just remove that for the second and just make that text small. And that seems to be a pretty decent gradient. And I might also just remove that gap for the second, but instead put it underneath the H2. So I might say PB of 2, just so we have these and then we have the gap underneath. So that can be our 3 companies. And now we can see that when we come across here, it just centers it. And if we look at that, that's pretty in line with the content that we have here. If anything, we could possibly just add a gap 1 under there, just so it's a bit further apart. And you could possibly just make this font bold, so it's really bold. And maybe we even just make it uppercase, just like that. So now we've got that good contrast, super nice. And then when we drop down onto a smaller screen, we have that section just there, and that also looks good. What I might also just do is make sure that this image is centered. And we can do that by just inspecting it, bringing it over like that, and we can see that inside of that div, that image is indeed centered. So that's all good. So now the next panel we're going to work on is that skills section. And so for the skills section, we're going to come into skills, and we're going to start off by giving this a class name of shadow, so that it has a shadow, and we're going to give it a background of white so that it's even lighter than the rest of everything else. What we might also do is just make sure that both of these things occupy the full length of the page. And we can do that in here where we set the main, which is rendered inside of this. So this is given a flex. We can give this a flex of 1. And now we can see that everything just jumps down to the bottom of the page. Now I might also just come back into skills and make this rounded small, just so we have some nice rounded corners. And if we look at what else we have, we can see that there's actually a pretty large gradient across the page. So we could even replicate that if we really wanted to, but I actually don't think I will. And instead what I'll do is just give this a shadow of large. So it's a bigger shadow, maybe extra large. Nice big shadow on that component. And in main, we probably just want to give this a bit of a gap. So I might just give it a gap of 4, just to push that out to the side a little bit. Now up here, it looks like we have a whole bunch of sections. And so what I'm going to do is have 3 separate sections. And so the first one is going to be div just like this. And for that, I might actually just give this a flex and a flex column and a gap of 4. The first section, which will have an h1 tag, is going to be info, just like that. While I'm at it, I might just give this a padding of 4, push it inwards. Maybe we could go 3, a bit smaller. Then we're going to have a secondary section, which is going to be legitimately skills, just like that. And then we might have a third section, which can be just for fun, like that. And that should be inside of an h1 tag. So we'll put that inside of an h1, paste that in there just for fun. Now I'm going to start off by boosting these in size, because we can see that if we look at this image, they're just a bit larger. And while we're at it, we're just going to make sure that it looks good on a smaller screen. And so we can see that it actually doesn't look too bad having that section down the bottom. So I'm just going to start off by making that text extra large, font bold. Maybe we could go even larger, text 4XL, just like that. And then when we come across, it actually doesn't look too bad. So we can just keep that extra large. And we can copy that for all of them. So we can just copy this class name, paste that in there, and paste that in there. Now we have these 3 big sections down the bottom. Actually, to be fair, I think they should probably copy the name. So let's just check out what that is. About me, that's text 4XL and a font bold. So that's what we're going to stick with. Oh, that's what I have. Cool. Actually, I lie. That's where. And what I might just do to vary it up is actually remove the bold fonting. just so that it's, you know, a bit of a new section. So inside of here, underneath, we can see that we have some stuff here, and I'm going to do something slightly different for that. So I'm going to have a div that has a class of flex and items center and gap of 2. And in here, I'm going to have an h3 tag, and that's going to say email. And then I'm going to have an anchor tag that is class name text cyan 500. And this is going to have my email. And this is just going to say demo email at gmail.com. And what we can do in here is give this an href equals mail to, and then, you know, you just put in your email here. So in this particular case, it's going to be demo email at gmail.com, just like that. Now we're also going to want to have a gap inside of here, so we're going to have a class, and this is going to be flex col gap 2, just like that. And I'm going to make this section text small, just so it's a little bit bigger. Actually, we could even have text base, and I might bring that down to a 3XL. And maybe make that small again. No, that can be base. Sure. So that doesn't look too bad. And I'm also just going to drop that to a 2 and make this a class name equal to text semi-bold. And that should actually be font semi-bold, just like that. So now that sits a bit darker. We're also going to be very clever with how we do this and give this a class name of relative and a hover effect, which is going to be defined here. And so what we will need for that is an after, which is going to have a position of absolute. After has a top of full. After has a width of full, just like that. After has a height of 1. After has a left of, well, actually it's going to be right of full, so it pushes it off the page. And we're going to say after background purple 700 maybe. So there we can see we have that little element, probably just a bit thick. So I'm actually going to change this to a 1 pixel custom amount. Maybe we make that 2 pixels, just like that. And I might drop the color down to a 500. And what we want is on hover, we want the after to translate X full. So what that will look like is when I hover, it's going to do this. And we can slow that down by saying after duration 300, just like that. So now we hover and it does this. And then we just need to hide it at the start, so we can say overflow is hidden. So now we have a nice little element. However, that has gone a little bit too low. So I might just say top is 99%. Will that do it? It's obviously too much. 95%. There it is there. Let's make that 94. And we could actually just change that to bottom 0 instead. Should just do the same thing. So now we have that nice little hover effect, and then we can go ahead and duplicate this for all of our additional details. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to replicate it, you know, however many times you want. I might do, what's that? We've got email. We're going to have GitHub. This is going to be in addition to the links up the top. The GitHub can be an href. You can just have your particular GitHub. So mine is James MCA. Then in the next one, we can have LinkedIn. So mine is going to be James MacArthur. And then for me, the last one might be YouTube. And that's just going to be small James. Just like that. So now we have this, and each of them has this cute little effect. And what you'll want to do is come in and modify all of these, because not all of them are going to be emails. You know, a lot of them will be links. So this one is going to be https://youtube.com/smalljames. This one is once again going to be your LinkedIn. And then here we're once again going to have the GitHub. And once again, you'll just want to add target equals _ blank to each of them. So we just copy that and paste it inside of this one. So after the href, and same for this one just here after the href. Pop that in there. And so now once again, if I click on that, that takes me to the GitHub. So that's absolutely perfect. Now for the next one, we have some skills. So here we can see that it kind of uses all of this random stuff, which we can kind of rip off. So what I'm going to do is in here, I'm just going to create a div, and this is going to have class of flex, items, center, gap, maybe 2, and we can say flex wrap so that they wrap onto the next line. And up here, what I'm going to do is put in some subsections, and then within each subsection, we can map out this. So I'm going to create an object, which is const skills is equal, actually let's name it something else. We'll call it ski is equal to, and it's going to be an object where the key name is going to be the section. So it could be JavaScript, for example, and then inside of JavaScript, I'm going to have an array of all of the things. So that's going to be React, React Native, Svelte Kit, and Node.js, just like that. Then we're going to have Python, open that up, and here I'm going to have data analysis. And we might also have Django and visualization. Then after that, we'll have web. So in web, we might be looking at things like Sass, TailwindCSS, Firebase, NoSQL, SQL, things like Heroku, which is kind of irrelevant now. We might have Netlify, AWS, Git, Docker. You could put Kubernetes and Google Cloud Platform. And then for the last one, we might just have design, just like that. And then in here, we can have, for me, it's just going to be Canva and Pixlr. So that's pretty cool. And so what we can have down here is, we're actually going to change this. We're going to just have object.keys. We're going to take ski and we're going to map over that. And so the first index is going to be the key name. We can take the index, and once again, we're going to have an arrow function that returns some JSX. Now in here, what we're going to do is have a div. So we can close the div. And in here, we can have the h3 of whatever the name is. So in that particular case, it could be key name. And now what we're going to do is have this section, and we're actually going to have a secondary map. So it's going to be ski key name, access all of the arrays dot map. And in here, we can just have the particular skill. And we can once again return some JSX. Now, one thing I've forgotten to do, silly me, on all of these, I'm just going to destructure the index, is if we come into our thing and inspect this page, we will see that I will have a whole lot of errors. And it's because every .map needs to have, the parent div needs to return a key, which is equal to the index. So we just have to make sure that we come in here and add that. Key is equal to the index. And likewise for this one just here. So this div is going to need a key equal to the index, and then this one is going to have a key equal to I. So that should resolve all of our issues. Refresh that page. We can see that I missed one somewhere. Check the random method of navbar. Key is equal to the index. So that is all fixed, and now we can go back to what we were doing, which is having all these skills. So we can see that each of the head names has been mapped out, but now what we want inside here is a whole lot of little purpley green things, and they're all going to have the same class names as this particular button right here. So if we just go back into About Me and find this button, here we can get the beautiful styling. So we can just have all of this just like that, and we can give that to this class name. And in here, what we can just render out is the skill, just like that. So now what I would expect is all of these to populate just like that, which is really nice. What I'm also going to do is give them the text extra small so that we bump them down in size. I'm also going to drop that down to a 2 and that to a 1. And now when we drop the screen size, we can see that they all wrap. And I also might just remove this rounded to a regular rounded so that they're more like that. So I think that looks pretty cool. And then if we come over to this big screen, we can see that that looks excellent just there. I'm also just going to bump this size up. So if we come into skills and look at that key name, we can just say class name is equal to text large. And we also want to make sure that between each of them, we're going to have some space. So if we're going flex item center, and so how we're going to spread these out a bit is just by wrapping this inside of a div, and we can give this a class name of flex column gap 3, just like that. And now if I just wrap that element inside of that, we can get a bit of space between them. And so since we can see that we really have quite a lot of these, what I might actually just do is change this section here. So instead of having a flex wrap, I'm just going to have an overflow scroll. So what that's going to mean is that we can scroll along all the different sections for each of them. And what I'll also do is remove that and have items stretch so they all occupy the same height now. So that looks real good. Notice I spelled Python wrong. And what we want to do is just not have that text break. And so we can stop this from flowing onto the new line by typing white space no wrap. Just like that. And now we can see that none of them wrap onto the next line, and you can just scroll to see them all. So then we have the last section, which is the just for fun. And what we're going to do for this is go font awesome CDN 6.0. We're going to come into the CDN package, copy this top link, and we're going to come into the index.html, and inside of this head, we're going to paste that link just there. And what that will allow us to do is come over to Font Awesome and go into icons, and you can just start typing in your hobbies. So let's say like dogs, we'll click enter, we'll click free. We can have a dog, we can copy that icon, and we're going to come into the skills section just here and find just for fun. Underneath just for fun, we're going to have a div that's going to have a class name of flex items center flex wrap. And in here we can paste our first icon. And now if we come back to our website, we can see that we have a little dog there. One thing I noticed is that we just need to translate some of the styling. So if we come up to this top div, we can see that we gave that a gap of 2. Might just bump that down to a 1. But moral of the story is that we want to just copy that. Might bring this down to a 1 as well. Pull them together just for fun. We want that on this div just here. Class name is equal to flex. Push that down a bit. And now we can probably bump up the icon sizes. So we can say text large. It's going to boost the size. We possibly want a padding of 4 just to bring them in a little bit, and maybe a gap of 2. And now you can just go and get a whole lot of icons that you want. So let's say like rockets. You can take the rocket. We'll paste that in there. Let's just have a look. So we have free icons. Let's get rid of the search. Free. We just want free. You know, you could have ghosts. Why not? You like voodoo. Everyone likes a hot cup of coffee, so we can add that in. You can have a snowflake if you enjoy skiing. But anyway, you get the moral of the story. And so what I'm just going to do is make sure that they all have class names. Just like that. And now we just have this little fun section down there that looks kind of neat. And so that's our web page looking pretty excellent. The other thing we're just going to do is configure a project site, and we probably also want to change the context. So let's just do that real quick. So we can just come in here and turn this into an anchor tag for the second button. This can be an anchor, and that can be href equals mail to, once again, your email at gmail.com, just like that. Now for the button, what we're going to do is have some state. So in here, we're going to say import use state from React, just like that. And we're going to define a modal, so const show modal and set show modal is equal to use state false. And what we're going to have in here is a new component called modal.jsx. We're going to say RFC. And what we're going to do is come into this particular part and define a second root. So div ID is equal to portal, just like that. So now we have a second div in here that doesn't contain any information. And essentially what we're going to do is also import React DOM from React and return React DOM.create portal. And inside of this syntax, we're going to pass in our div, just like that. And we're going to pass in the ID of portal so that it knows what portal to create. And so essentially this syntax is going to render out this portal inside of our second modal. And so we just have to make sure we come into here and give this a class name of relative, because that's what our portal is going to be relative to. So now that we have that section just here and we render out modal inside of it, what we have to do is then display the modal. So we're going to come in here and say show modal and modal. So we're going to render out that particular component like this, just like that. So if show modal is true, then we're going to render out the page. And in here, we could just for the second say class name width 90%, height can also be 90%, just like that. And we can give it a background of purple 300 and a Z of 20 and relative. So that sits atop the page. And if we just set this to true, we can see that we get an error. And that's because I've imported this wrong. This should actually be, that also just needs to, that is still not working because that should be React DOM, and this should actually be document.getElement by ID of portal, so that we actually target that particular element. And finally, we can just change that. And now our portal is nowhere to be seen. And so what I will just do is come into the component where we render it and just change this to width screen, height screen. And we can see that it does actually show up down there. However, I forgot to give it an absolute positioning and an inset of 0. So that actually means that we can just ditch those for a second. And so now when I refresh the page, it sets down the bottom, get rid of that. And now it covers up the full screen, which is just what we want, which means that we can set the top equal to half, the left equal to half, minus translate x 1/2, minus translate y 1/2. And we can set the width to 80% and the height to 80% of the parent element. So now we get a nice little modal in the middle. I might actually give it a shadow also, and additionally set the background to slate 900 so that we get a dark modal. And inside of here, the sky is the limit with what you can achieve. I'll say text white, so that shows up. And I'll also give this a flex and flex column. Now we're going to want two things up the top. So we're going to have a div, and this is going to have a class name of flex justify between items center. And here what we're going to do is have an H2 that says projects, just like that. And then we're going to come over to the icons just here and say close. So we're just going to take this X mark, use this icon, and pop that in there. Swap out class for class name and make that text white. And hover, we want to rotate. We're going to give a custom 30 degrees, just like that. So now when we hover over that, it should rotate. On this whole thing, we probably want to give it a padding of 4. And then inside of projects, which we might just bump up, we'll bump up the size of both these things. So we'll say text large, just like that. So on a mini screen, it looks kind of like this. Actually, on a mini screen, I might just make it full screen. So we can say that's on a medium. That's also on a medium. And otherwise, we will just say width full, height full. So on a small screen, it occupies everything. And if I go away from it, it takes up most of the span. And now after this div, which we might just give a gap of 2 to, we'll have a secondary div, and this is where we're going to have all our projects. So we can say const projects is equal to this, and in here we can have a bunch of objects, just like that. And now what we're going to do is say class name flex items center gap 1 bg white and flex wrap. And basically I might also just boost this text to being an extra large, so XL, so that comes up a little bit. Nice. We might just quickly make these things actually work. So this one needs to be a cursor pointer. On here we want to receive props, and here we want to const destructure on close from props, just like that. Props is going to be as follows. So we're going to have an on close function that is just going to be defined here. So we'll say function on close handler set show modal false, just like that. So now we can pass that in here, and then we can just reference that on click for this particular icon. So on click can just be on close. So now that should close that modal, and then we just want to be able to open up projects again. So we'll just tie that to about me, which means we have to pass it to about me. So we'll just define another function, open modal, just like that, set show modal true, and we can pass this down here, and we can receive it inside about me. So we can say props const destructure is equal to props, and then we can just provide an on-click handler to this button just here. So we can say on-click is equal to open modal. So now when we click projects, it opens up the modal, and then we can have all our projects here. So that should be nice and neat and fun. And for each of our projects, which is going to go into our modal, the first thing we want is to have a mapped out render. So once again, since this is an array, we can just go projects.map. We can take a project, an index, have an arrow function, and return some JSX. So we're going to have a div where the key is equal to the index. We can close that div, and we could give this a standard width and height. So we could say, maybe the class name is equal to height 200. Well, actually, on a small screen, what we want to do is just say width is full aspect video, just like that. So if we open that up, we can see we get some random stuff going on here. And that's because this should actually be for a small screen. So if we come down, then that will look a bit better. So now I noticed that we've got a couple of issues with this modal just here. The first one is that on the big screen, it just absolutely overflows, which is not what we want. And the second thing is that these gaps aren't really working, but maybe I can change that by saying background slate 400. So there's all our separate projects, which we can configure in a second, but we're still getting this big overflow. And so if we just come in here for a second, we can see that on a little screen, what we might actually just do is redo some of this. So on a little screen, I'm just going to say top 0, left 0, width screen, height screen, just like that. So that should be this screen here, which is fine. It also means that they can kind of go past it. I'm also just going to say overflow scroll, so that this should sit inside, and now we've kind of got two separate scrolling elements. They can scroll down below. What I'm also going to do is change this padding here and just move it to this element so that that sits in, and then this kind of just goes like that. And that way the images take up the full width of the screen. I'm also going to change the gap to 1 pixel so that it's even smaller. Actually, no. And now what we need to do is configure on a bigger screen, because that just looks absolutely daft. So on a bigger screen, so we can say on a medium screen, we're going to say top half, medium left half. We're going to say medium minus translate x 1/2, medium minus translate y 1/2. That'll center it. And we're also just going to change it to medium width is going to be 90% of the view width, and on medium height is going to be 90% of the view height, just like that. So now that sits in a little bit. We might also just give that some padding. So medium is going to have a padding of 4. Actually, that needs to be on this element here. So on medium, we're going to give this a padding of 4. And I think that the other thing we will do is change this. So on medium, we're going to have a width of auto and a height of 200 pixels px, just like that. So now we kind of get this effect, which is going to be better. And I might also just, well, actually we can change that entirely. So we could just say, instead of having this, we could just give this a grid cols 1, and on a medium, let's just take it to grid cols 3. Just like that, and we can get rid of the flex wrap. So that just means that on a small screen, we'll just have this solid column like that, and on a bigger screen, we shouldn't be getting this, and I can fix that by just removing that command just there. So that'll split it into 3 columns, and as we continue to go, it will just keep going in 3 columns. And I might just change this to medium gap 3, so that it's square on all sides. So that looks pretty good. Now we can go ahead and close that, and we have this projects modal, which is pretty neat. And now we can fill that out with our project. So we can actually remove this background just like that. And in here we can have a name just like that, a link to the project, description, and the last thing you'll want is the GitHub. And we're going to do that for all of them. For the sake of time, I'm not actually going to fill it out, but I will just say rah-de-rah, rah-de-rah. We have a whole lot of text here. And then for the GitHub, that can just be rah-de-rah, and I might actually just instead duplicate that 3 times and get rid of this last one. We have to make sure that we have the separating comma. Oh, that shouldn't be there. That also should not be there. So now we have our 3 projects, and if we open up in the projects, we cannot see them. So we're going to give this a border solid. Actually have some extra little entries slipping in there, which we don't necessarily want. So just make sure I get rid of them. So now we're just back to the 3 entries. We have a little border around each of them. I might actually change that to have being background slate 900, text white. And we could even actually just get rid of that so it's a small little gap in between them. And I'm just also going to remove that padding and make that a padding of 1. So it actually matches. And so now we have these little columns around our projects, and in here we can just, have an H1 of the project.name. We can give this a flex col gap of 2, just like that. We might also give it a padding of 2, push them in. Under the project, we can have the description. So we can have a p tag, that is the project.description. So that's the description. This can have a class name of text extra small, so it's extra small. And then under that, we can have a div, and that can have a class of grid calls 2. And in here, we can just have 2 anchor tags. So we can have an anchor tag there. Let me just move that onto a new line. And this can say live. And then we can have a secondary one that can say GitHub, just like that. And in here we can add text center so that the text is centered. We can give this a flex of 1. So that pushes those to the bottom. And you could just wire up the links to each of those particular projects in here, and that will just wrap onto new lines continuously. So now that we have the projects modal all finished, which you can see just there, we can close out of that. The last thing we might want to do is just come in and add some form of light-hearted background graphic. And so what we can do is just come in here and type imagine. We're going to give it a -AR of 2 to 3. So it's going to be slightly more landscapey. And in here, we can also specify -V4 --stylize 500. And at the front, we're just going to say a background graphic whale stencil, light gray outlines, light shades, minimalism, just like that. So let's see what that gives us. And we can see that kind of works, but maybe not quite. And so what we want to do is swap this. So we're going to copy. So we will copy this line just here, do that again, type imagine, and this time instead of stencil, we're going to say outline. We're also going to say outline here, lines, light gray outlines, light shade, minimalism, and this needs to be the 3, and this one needs to be the 2. And so here you can see we kind of have some pretty cool stencils. I actually quite like this one in the top corner. So what I'm going to do is just get an upscaled version of the wrong one. It's actually 2, upscaled version of number 2. And so now that is all done, and we can save that image, which is pretty cool. Save it in our background, and we can then copy that image wherever you saved it into the public folder. So just here, I'm just going to rename it, get rid of everything. We'll call it whale.png. Here's our whale. And with whale, what we can do is come into a site called Pixlr. We can open the image just like that. We can use this select tool to select the outlines, remove it, layer deselect, and we're pretty much just left with the skeleton of the whale. And I'm just gonna take the rubber and erase this extra line just there. And so now that we just have that, we can once again save that image as a PNG. And now that is overridden as just the SVG. And so what we can do is come into our main section, or even better, our app. And in here where we have our layout, we can render out an image with a source equal to ./whale.png. And we can say alt is equal to whale, just like that. Close that off. Here we have the whale stencil, which is kind of fun. And now what we can do is just say class is equal to absolute inset 0. And I actually might move that so that it is inside of this section just here. So I'm just going to put a relative on that instead and pop that down there. And then what we can do is here just say overflow hidden. So now we just have that funky whale stencil in the background, and it's coming up on top of a bunch of other things. So we just want to send it right to the back by saying Z0. So now it should sit behind, and we might also give it an opacity of 50. just like that. So it's just a bit faded in the background, a bit of extra graphics. For some reason, it's coming on top of our skills bar. And so we should be able to fix that by putting this as a relative and a Z10. And so now that's just going to cut that off. And then on a smaller screen, we just have that little graphic in the background, and on a bigger screen, we have this neat whale. However, I notice it's still sitting on top of everything. So I think what we're also going to have to do is just give everything else a Z of 10. So that now that sits on top, and I might have to do the same for skills, which we've already done, Z of 10. So now everything should still work perfectly, and we just have this whale graphic in the background. Anywho, that's pretty much it for this tutorial today. We took an image and we kind of built off there to generate a bit of a portfolio site, you know, quick and dirty. But yeah, this AI technology is going to be absolutely amazing for generating cool web designs. Make sure you get some variations of the product and just absolutely dive in to those UIs and build them out today. If you've enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and sub, super appreciated, and leave a comment down below of what you'd like me to do next. Catch you guys in the next one. Peace.